Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Lager Line, served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. Today, as we kick off Memorial Day weekend here in the States, I'm joined by a couple of guests who are not in the States, so perhaps they have a bit more time to help me break down the 2023 NBA draft and some of the possibilities for the Rockets. We've got Paulo Alves, my usual co-host and producer out of Portugal, and Nathan Fogg, Rockets fan and NBA draft analyst out of England. You can follow Paulo on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA and Nathan on there at Nathan Fogg 1. First things first, I want to welcome Nathan to the show for the first time. Nathan, thank you so much for taking the time. You excited for some Rockets draft talk?
Always, I think about this. It's the first thing I think of when I wake up and the last thing I think of when I go to bed, other than my girlfriend, now fiance. But other than that, it's the draft all the time.
Congratulations on that, by the way. Saw that,
you.
just about a month or so ago?
Yes, yeah, we were in France, which I will never go back to now. It's dead to me. So I hope you like that trip.
Yes, good thing you got it in front of
you. You go with your one another friends, and now you're never going again.
I've always been an Italy guy anyway.
Screw 1B, screw the Spurs. The last few days on Rockets Twitter, there's been a lot of debate over whether the James Harden return scenario is worthwhile because of this idea that he's ball dominant. And the question, of course, is how that fits in with the development of the young core and whether he's the right floor general, the right point guard to bring in. So with that in mind, I don't want to be too podcast dominant. This is our second show of the week. So we're going to do things a little bit different today. And I'm actually going to hand over the keys to Paulo and let him ask the first question. So Paulo, why don't you start this discussion with Nathan and take this wherever you want to go?
Listen, I could be, professional and stuff and start by asking an introductory question like, what's your top 4 draft board, or who do you like it for, or something simpler like that. But let's be honest, nobody's here for that. So I'm just going to go with, it's not a super complicated question, but I think it's a little bit more thought-provoking, which is, if Harden does come, right, as it's looking likely, I still believe that I still think he's going to the Sixers, because I don't think Daryl Morey will be able to hold the standoff of not offering just max money for 4 years for too long, because they don't really have any other options. But assuming he comes, right, I think we've debated to death basically every single angle of it pre-lottery. And now that the lottery has come and that we're looking at what likely will be Amen Thompson, or it could be Ausar, but who knows? I think it will be Amen. Or if Scoot falls, I'm going to continue to manifest that until the end of time, until we can't do it anymore. Likely a point guard prospect. And the question arises that, well, if Harden's coming in, you now have Harden. You have KPJ, who's likely not going to be a point guard, but still is a ball-dominant guard. You got Jalen Green, who is probably the one that's better off because he'll play more off ball. Now you have a top 4 pick that's going to need minutes. And if the Pat Bev rumors are true, you might have Pat Bev on the roster as well, and he's going to want to play some. I'm going to boil this down to, let's imagine it's just the only guys that matter are Jalen Green, James Harden, and whoever we drafted for. How do you feel, Nathan, about whoever we drafted for coming in behind James Harden early on, or does the fact that the Rockets landed at 4 make you not want James Harden back anymore?
So the 2 point guards, Scoot and Amen, are going to need time to bed into the NBA. I think that's for sure, especially Amen, who I have been talking about this for a while now, could have one of the worst rookie seasons. But we just saw Jabari Smith really struggle, so I don't think it'd be a shock anymore to Houston fans, but you should really prepare for a very bumpy landing. He could just be amazing, obviously, but I think you should sort of expect the worst is kind of how I go about this, because he's been playing in overtime elite, which is, in an alien world compared to the NBA cut. So just throwing him out there in the way that Houston's been throwing out prospects over the last 3 years would have been a recipe for disaster, and just rolling the ball out and saying, go and cook, go and play one-on-one against NBA defenses. That would have been, I think, actually malpractice in terms of development. So I'm supportive of getting a point guard to sort of help him, let him play a little bit off ball, let him hit some catch and shoot shots, let him cut, and then let him play backup point guard against, bench units. I think that would be actually very helpful for his development, with the aim of him coming on into a more ball dominant role, maybe towards the end of the season, maybe next season. But James Harden is likely signing on a longer than a 1 year deal. I think we can all sit here and pretend, wouldn't it be great if he signs on a 1+1? Maybe that happens, but more than likely it's a longer deal. And Amen Thompson's 20 years old. By the time of that Harden contract, he's going to be 23 or 24. That's a long time to be sat basically towel waving or playing in a smaller role, when you also need him to get reps and learn NBA defenses and struggle in the way that Jalen has. I mean, Jalen had really no pick and roll game to his game. I would say, I think it was a huge deficiency, but they thrust him, I think, unnecessarily into a hugely on ball role this year, where he was running the most, I think it was like the 6th or 7th most pick and roll in the league. But what I will say is, by the end of the season, I think you did see some genuine playmaking chops from him, because he was thrown into the fire. So I would like a more sort of balance where it's kind of halfway. You let him play kind of like a Shaden Sharp, get him some easy cuts, easy dunks, let him get some media love earlier on in the season, really simplify his role. But you still want him to get plenty of playmaking point guard duties, and I just don't see how that's possible with James Harden and with Jalen Green as well, because it's not going to be a your turn, my turn, Chris Paul offense. So that's what worries me. Anything longer than 1 year, I would want to play it year by year with someone like Chris Paul, Kyle Lowry, Mike Conley, other point guards like that. That's on a 1 year basis where you can kind of just see how it goes. Whereas James Harden, that's much more of a long-term commitment, which is really risky to me.
Would you feel any better about the fit with Ausar Thompson, who is Amen's twin brother? Because I feel like, on Twitter, a lot of the discourse just boils down to a Thompson twin. But they do have, even though, of course, they're twins and they have similar body types and frames, they have different games. They, of course, each played for the overtime elite. But Amen, you touched on the playmaking. He's a bit more of a pure point guard in terms of his vision. But, of course, there's the big questions with his jump shot. He's a bit more raw. Ausar Thompson might not be quite as explosive and isn't quite the point guard, but there's a lot more to like with his shot. He did show some growth there. And so I think with him being a bit more of a wing, having a bit higher floor when it comes to his shot, and I suppose just overall he has a slightly higher floor, because if the jump shot is trustworthy, then it's much harder to envision a total bust scenario, especially when you're looking at a guy who's 6'7" and that type of athlete and fairly versatile, can play a lot of different roles, and so on and so forth. So would you feel any better about Ausar Thompson in a scenario where maybe you're bringing Harden back for 2 or 3 years? I don't think that you should draft at that pick based on Harden. I'm on record as saying that before, and the Rockets have told me largely the same thing, and I believe them. But if it's sort of a coin flip, you could go either way, and you see pros and cons to both guys. Is Ausar possibly a better day one fit? And if he is, does that enter into your calculus at all when you're looking at the Rockets and who makes sense for them at 4?
So yeah, he is a better fit for sure. He's an off-ball wing who can play on ball, and I think has some juice there, but is much more of a connective kind of passer than Amen. I think Ausar has the chance to be, the best connective passer in the NBA. I mean, think of KJ on steroids. Athletic, tall, can cut, can get to the rim with ease, but way better off a dribble, and just I mean, you can easily watch Amen looking at his point guard skills, and then kind of your eyes glaze over and you realize you've been looking at Ausar for the last 5 minutes, because he does so much of the same stuff really, but from the wing position. I don't think he has the on-ball juice that Amen does. He can't sort of create from the top of the key. He turns away a lot of the free throw line when those help defenders come. He just doesn't have that sort of downhill one-on-one pressure that Armin does. But in terms of the passing and the vision and the playmaking, it's very high for a wing prospect. So I mean, this is the kind of player that we were wishing Harden had for a long time in Houston. Someone who could create his own shot a little bit, get downhill a little bit, but also has that athleticism to do something off a bounce rather than stand in the corner, but also make the next pass, put pressure as a cutter. I would caution the shooting. I think this is one of those things that very quickly, it's true that he's a better shooter than Armin and a better shooter, a better prospect in that sense, but that shouldn't be mistaken for saying he's any sort of safe bet. He's still a very poor shooter as a prospect. He has more to work with. Apparently his drills so far, I guess, in the offseason have showed promise, and it's a testament to his work. But I would caution the idea that he is just compared to Armin, he's a good shooter, but compared to everybody else, he's still a bad shooter. So that is a poor fit next to Harden because he's somebody who's going to be helped off easily. But that means he can do what PJ Tucker couldn't do or Robert Covington couldn't do, which is cut and get the ball and finish at the rim or pass to the next guy. He's going to be a very good fit off ball, making that next decision.
It's so weird because I was ready to say that even though he's still a bad shooter, that he was shooting nearly 80% from the free throw line, but that was early in the season. That completely fell off. He finished down to 67%. It's so sad. I think sometimes I'm listening to people talk about Amen versus Ausar, and it's the weirdest thing because it kind of strikes me as if, I mean, they're twins. They were born on the same day, right? But it sometimes kind of strikes you as like Ausar is like a year older or something like that, just from the type of player that he is. Does anybody get that feeling when you hear other people talk about him?
I think just the way that he's talked about, it's very much more like of a role player. So that kind of fits into that age narrative, I guess, where you think of Armin as this incredibly raw prospect when, easy to forget that he's 20 and that would be an old prospect coming in, that's Brandon Miller's age, basically. So, I mean, he's older than Jabari Smith, I believe, by a year. So, just the what they tried to do. I don't think Ausar is better right now as a player than Armin. I think Armin is a better player on day one, but his role, likely because he is the point guard, is tougher. So
you don't buy into any of the arguments that they should draft Ausar at 4 instead of Amen. You think it's a wash to Amen's side?
Yeah. I think everyone who goes through the tape and watches them game by game will have seen the mock drafts and the big boards, knowing that Armin is consensusly above. I think it's closing because there's always movement around this time of year, but for most of the season, it's been a couple of slots ahead of him. And then they do what I did. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say there's a couple of people, Madison Moore, and I think the guys that draft deeper that have Ausar at 4, but for the most part, it's Amen at 4. And Amen's, I do these mock draft roundups for Rockets Wire, and Amen at this point in the cycle is pretty much 90% to the Rockets, whereas Ausar is a clear outlier, and a lot of times, sometimes that's just people trying to make their draft stand out. Don't think that's the case with Madison or Draft Deeper. I know they do their homework, but for the most part, I think Amen is the consensus front runner, at least amongst those two right now.
Yeah, and I think Madison is going through a similar journey, and I tweeted at him and he kind of agreed that I went through. So I wouldn't be surprised if he eventually has Amen ahead of Ausar, but basically what happens is I think so many times you watch him expecting Amen to be so much higher. And this is what I did. You think, wow, this Ausar is actually pretty amazing. And he makes a lot of the same passes just as you're watching, and he's still very athletic. And I wonder if Ausar is actually the better twin, because that's always the thing that's going to come into anybody's mind. It's not a hot take to wonder whether the twin, who is only 2 spots ahead, it's not like he's 30 spots below him on mock drafts. And then I think eventually, as you keep watching and as you keep digging deep and as you really get into the granular details, of which I like to do, with a handful of prospects each year. I can't do with them all of them. I think as you keep watching, most people will agree that Amen just has way more on-ball, high, upside as a creator. Because, like I say, you watch Ausar when Amen's off the court, and there is just so many times where he just gets turned away at the free throw line. He doesn't commit to his drives, and I just worry that breaking a defense down is something that neither of these guys have necessarily proven that we can do yet, because of the way the OT is played, because there's so much in transition. But you feel so much better about Amen being able to do that. And if Ausar can't do them, that quite quickly puts him into more of a role player off ball box.
Yeah, the way that Madison put it, and That's Madman Leaks on Twitter. We've had him on this pod before. I think he said that Amen is much more of an east-west guy. He's got the shiftiness on his drives, whereas Ausar is much more north-south. He's a bit more rigid, which theoretically limits his playmaking upside because he's just not as comfortable doing different things with his body and making more complex reads. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I liked the way that thread, the difference in their athleticism. Amen is a better athlete, but it's, Ausar is still, incredible athlete. Amen has, it's not just his first step, which is up there with Jalen's and will be 90% of defenders, just off that one first step. It's his, he has a hang dribble. He has so many fakes with the ball, like whether it's faking off a pass, a fake wraparound pass that Şengün likes to do as well, and then pass it to somebody else, or whether it's just so many times a pick and roll defender is shading you left, but then they're ready to flip right if you think he's going to do the crossover, and then he'll kind of fake a behind the back and then move forward. So it's like that hang dribble where it's just a hesitations and really reading what the defender is doing and faking the defender out of his position to then, he's not just relying on his athleticism. And then, once he gets middle, he has an absolutely beautiful Euro step. He has a spin around move. That's the move that most likely gets him in trouble right now with the turnovers because he just has to tighten up that handle. But he has way more. His handle is very elite, I would say, for a guard prospect, which is not something that Ausar has to that same level in terms of on-ball creation.
So keeping on the theme of comparing the two, defensively, right? Because I think a lot of people just look at them both and put them in the same categories, and a lot of people expect Amen specific to be, a point of attack defender and a good one at that from day one. And just watching them, I cannot be sold on it. I can see a lot of upside playing the passing lanes that they do gamble a little bit on steals. I can see the off-ball defense being there and using his athleticism in specific. I haven't watched Ausar as much, so I'll lean on you to enlighten us on that. But how do you rate, especially on ball, both of their defenses? Because especially if James Harden's coming in, I think the Rockets will be looking for a guy that can throw on ball. And other than Tyrese, and I don't think they have anybody that could be trusted in that role right now. How do you rate their defenses on ball and what they project to be? I'm guessing they project to be awesome, but I'll ask anyways.
Yeah, I think Ausar is the better on-ball defender for now. I think he was pretty incredible in that league. He has, it's funny you talk about the north-south sort of athleticism. He kind of has it in his own body. He flips up and down very, very quickly. He has this interesting stance where he gets low, and then as soon as the guard drives on him, he immediately goes upright and kind of blocks their path without using his arms, without trying to foul. And he just kind of, because he's so much taller than most of his guards and so much bigger, he has this kind of like hip flexibility, but it's up and down rather than side to side, flipping the hips. He just shoots upright and just blocks the path. And it's very much like ushering you towards a help, ushering you away from a paint. And he's very good at that. Amen instead is a way, way more off-ball defender for the team. He basically just freestyles and roams around and just jumps in passing lanes. He will just double at any opportunity. They put two to the ball a lot in the pick and roll, and he basically just, they say, Amen, you run around and go and grab a ball, and he does it a lot, and then he leaks out and gets dunks. That's clearly not going to be something he's going to be asked to do ever in the NBA. Nobody plays like that. I think he could absolutely trap, and I think the prospect of trying to run a 2-1 series, which is what most NBA offenses have in their playbook, right? It's that corner wing pick and roll start action where you run into a handoff, and you've got the baseline as a defender. And then if you add a 6'7" point guard with a 6'9" Tyrese and a 6'11" Jabari Smith on the wings, that's where you'll see that wingspan and that length just being an incredible deterrence to sort of keep the guard in front of you. But in terms of like just putting away measurements for now and just one-on-one defense, I think Amen is a bit lazy in the league, which is kind of understandable, and I think you have to accept as part of what happens when you're up 30 every second quarter. But when he locks in, he looks very good. And what I'm particularly impressed about him from a point of attack standpoint is someone you want to guard ones is his screen navigation. I think is very good, and getting skinny, getting around screens, and then getting on a guard's shoulder and forcing him away from a paint, I think is also good too. So I think that's something that he will be exposed in, but with a coach like Ime Udoka getting him disciplined very quickly, I think he will very quickly be a good defender at the point of attack.
In terms of comparisons, when we look at the 2023 draft compared to a year ago, both of the Thompson twins are going to go in the same range as Jaden Ivey a year ago, who went 5th to the Pistons. I know, Nathan, you were super high on Jaden. You made the argument that he could go as high as 2 or 3 overall. Where did he come in on your board?
2.
2? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew you were a big Jaden Ivey fan, and he had a pretty encouraging rookie year. I mean, the efficiency overall was blah, but that's fairly expected for rookies in the NBA. Overall, he averaged over 16 points, 5 assists per game, shot better than 34% from 3, all on a Detroit team where he had almost nothing around him. Cade missed the entire season. So I think a lot of people are encouraged by what they saw from Jaden Ivey. I think that was definitely a hit on your part, and he went at 5th in the draft, could have gone 4th, and that's the same range that the Thompson twins are projected at this year. Both of them 6'7" athletes, a bit taller than Jaden Ivey, but they do share some characteristics. How would you compare those two this year to Ivy, who I know was one of your guys a year ago, and specifically with Amen, who I know profiles to play a somewhat similar role in the NBA? Where are you on the Thompson twins and their upside compared to Jaden Ivey, who I know you really believed in and still do from last year's class?
Yeah, so I think this is one of those times where if I had both Armin and Ivy in front of me, I would just defer to the higher competition of college as this kind of tiebreaker. But if you just asked me to look at the tape and just say, what skill set do you believe in most? I think I believed most in Ivy's. I thought he could add a mid-range game and a floater and an in-between game, which he started to show in the second half of the season. Whereas it's much more hopeful that Armin, I think, needs to get that. And I think he's got the footwork and the balance and the post fadeaways of it. He just doesn't have a touch yet. Whereas I think Ivy it was always a case of him just learning how to slow down and get to that shot. But I believed more in the touch. So that's why Ivy may be slightly ahead. But as you know, as I want the sort of listeners to hear, and as you know, I'm glad you pointed out, I was exceptionally high in Ivy, and I think Amen Thompson is a far better prospect than Jabari Smith was last year's draft. And just think of how excited people were when we got the 3rd pick. Obviously, I know a lot of people wanted Paolo Banchero, but a lot of people also wanted Jabari, and we're still very high on him. So, I know maybe people aren't familiar with Thompsons. They don't want to watch OT. It's not the most accessible league. I think Amen is a way higher prospect, way better prospect than Jabari. So we should be excited about the prospect of getting him. And I think Ausar is, I think again, Ausar Jabari, I'll go with a tiebreaker of the college game in that sense. So Ausar is probably the lowest of all these guys, but I think it would go Ivy and then closely followed by Amen. But I would say Amen has just as high as a ceiling as Ivy, if not even higher. It's just the question marks are a little bit more questionable because of the competition. And he was, I think he was slightly older. Ivy was a second year, so maybe we were same age. But yeah.
He went through 2 years of college. You're right.
Yeah.
Is Ausar 5th on your board, just for our curiosity?
Yes, I had so Wemby, Scoot, Amen, Brandon Miller, Cam Whitmore, and then Ausar, and then Jarris. So yes, Ausar was 6. Yes.
Okay, so you still have Cam Whitmore ahead of him.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about Cam if you want.
Let me transition to that by asking about it in the context of a trade, because I think if the Rockets stay at 4 and the top 3 goes as everybody expects with Wemby and then Scoot and Brandon Miller in some order, Amen's clearly the best player available at that point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'm guessing you see, like a lot of people, a pretty severe drop off after 4. So if Amen jumps to 2 or 3, then whichever of Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller is on the board would then clearly be best player available, right?
Well, I think Brandon is much closer to Cam for me. I would want to go back and watch their tape. So Amen is clear 3, and then Brandon and Cam 4, 5 in some order.
Okay. Well, the reason I wanted to ask you about that, so of course, if they stay at 4, Amen Thompson is a pretty good bet, assuming he's on the board. There's a reason why he's mocked to the Rockets in so many projections, and there have been reports come out this week that the Rockets are comfortable with him. I don't think Jalen Green would have name dropped him on the podcast with Paul George if he didn't have at least a little bit of an inkling that that's an okay scenario for the Rockets. And again, even though they didn't get Wemby, they did have some good fortune in the lottery. 4 is a lot better than 6. It puts you in a higher tier. With that said, in one of these scenarios where for one reason or another, maybe Amen's not there. Maybe they're worried about the floor scenario, which is a bit lower for the reasons that Nathan outlined earlier than you would like with a prospect of his upside. There are some other interesting guys in the top 10. You look at certainly Cam Whitmore, Jarris Walker, Anthony Black. There's some other considerations at play, obviously his twin brother as well. And when you look at the Rockets at 4, it's hard for me to imagine that they would draft someone ahead of Amen Thompson, considering the value that he has. I think if Amen wasn't your guy, you could look to trade down, especially because there are reports that teams like the Pacers and the Magic are potentially looking to move up. So I guess my question for you is, and you mentioned earlier, if Brandon Miller's on the board at 4, you don't see that much of a delta between Brandon and Cam. I guess my big question for you is, if a scenario presents itself, I'm not even that interested in talking about trade up scenarios. At that point, it's just, can you trade up to 2 or 3 to get Scoot Henderson? It just depends on, is he higher on the Rockets board? And nobody's going to know that other than the Rockets themselves as they go through the process the next few weeks. In terms of, could you trade down? I don't think they want to trade down a lot because they already have a fairly deep rotation. And we've been talking about the need for consolidation moves for months now. It's not a situation at all with the Rockets where I think you want to trade $1 for 4 quarters. But conceivably, if you see a small delta between whoever you're looking at 4 and who you might could get at like 6 or 7, then yeah, maybe you do consider moving down if you can get like a future first out of the deal to sort of build up your war chest of assets for a blockbuster trade down the line. If you see the margin as that slim, it's something you should consider. So Nathan, where do you see the delta when we're talking about the guys in the 2 through 4 range, Scoot, Brandon, and Amen, versus the guys we haven't talked about yet, Cam Whitmore, Jarris Walker, Anthony Black, those that are sort of in the 5 through 8 range, along with Ausar Thompson? How much is that gap, and what scenarios are you thinking about if you're the Rockets potentially moving down if one of those teams around, say, 6 or 7 is inquiring about moving up?
Yeah, I think the problem with my tier is I have Brandon and Cam basically in a tier together, and those are 2 very different timeline kind of players, even though they're still first round draft picks. Houston wants to win games. They want a rookie, presumably, who can sort of fit in more fluidly early on. That's Brandon. Like, you can just play Brandon at 3 next to Jabari, have him play off Harden, off Şengün. He's going to hit shots. He's going to try some self-creation stuff. He's going to be a capable defender, I think, especially in that wing rotation with Tari and Jabari. And I think his landing would be a lot smoother. Whereas Cam Whitmore is going to be 18 on draft night. He's had a very stunted season so far in Villanova, where everything kind of went wrong. And he's going to be exceptionally raw. And it just depends if Houston really feels they have the luxury of drafting somebody who is 2 years younger and 2 years behind potentially Brandon Miller's production. Can they sit and watch Brandon Miller play for Orlando, let's say, next to Paolo Banchero and next to Franz Wagner, and they're in the playoffs maybe, and they're getting over plaudits, and Houston has Cam Whitmore averaging 8 points off a bench and looking kind of shaky? Can Rafael Stone stomach that? Can he even survive that? That's the big risk, I think, even if Cam ends up in 3 years the far superior player. I like Cam playing a very simplified role, make it as easy as possible for him, because that is somebody who really needs to learn the game. Have him stand in the corner, have him baseline cut, have him try and work on his freeze. I mean, I think he'd be incredible off Şengün, because his pressure on the rim and his athleticism as a cutter would be fantastic off a post big like Şengün. But the fit is, I think, a bit more intentional towards, we're going to play this way, we're going to play Shen Hub, we're going to sort of really use him in this specific role, whereas Brandon Miller is way more versatile. And if you're trying to win games now, you prefer versatility, I think, especially when you have a new coach who doesn't know the players and he's going to try and figure some stuff out. So that is just, I don't see as potentially a very likely prospect for Houston, especially if they have him similarly on the boards. So I just don't see. I mean, Detroit doesn't have anything to offer us because their picks are tied up. Orlando is the next one, or Indiana. I mean, Indiana, I just don't. I know we like talking about these trade ups and trade downs, but I just don't see what are they offering. I don't think they would want to give up Miles Turner or anything like that. So I just don't know.
I mean, I'm thinking maybe a protected future first, something along
Yeah.
those lines. Nothing that's especially sexy, but if you see the prospects as very similar in value, maybe it's something to consider. We should note that Cam Whitmore was in Houston this week. Paolo, you put that on your Twitter. You captured that from his Instagram, right?
Nah, I stole it from Clutch City,
Oh,
the
Brazil.
Brazil Rockets account.
Oh,
But
I
I
got
gave
you.
credit. Don't
Yeah.
blame me.
Okay. But he did work out with the Rockets. But my point, Nathan, to follow up when you were talking about Whitmore having a longer development cycle, at least in terms of his trajectory to eventually becoming a starter or more than that in the NBA. If we're talking about a scenario where, let's say, the Rockets do have James Harden and Pat Beverly coming in, and there's no big consolidation trade, and so the rotation is fairly deep, is that not maybe a scenario where you think, hey, I can bring him along a bit more slowly? I know it's not ideal, and you mentioned, Rafael Stone wanting to win games potentially for a number of reasons, but if it's a scenario where they feel like they have all these veterans coming in, and of course they've got 7 rotation players already before we even talk about these draft picks, does maybe the fact that you can sort of bring him along more slowly, as opposed to, we let off talking about Amen Thompson and James Harden, and do you need to give Amen a certain amount of minutes early on to develop a certain amount of not just minutes, but touches as well? Does the fact that maybe you can bring Cam along more slowly perhaps become part of the appeal to him in certain scenarios?
I mean, yeah, in a vacuum, yes. I think he would benefit enormously by playing off Harden. He can tell him where to stand, when to cut, when to space a floor, when to set a screen, when to roll, when to just pop for a free. Those are all the things he needs to learn in an NBA offense. But I think the problem is Houston doesn't want to just add James Harden and then have the rest of the roster the way it was. I think they're also looking for other upgrades. Yeah. So where does that come from? Let's say if you add Cam Whitmore, you're probably either looking at another wing, kind of like a Cam Johnson, or another sort of, a rim protecting center. And that's just when the minutes get squeezed. I mean, if you're looking at Cam as this kind of, I mean, you already have Jabari and Tari. And if you add like a Cam Johnson or another wing player who's going to play 20 plus minutes a night, you already have KJ and Tate, even if you got rid of them. That's just where a guy who isn't ready to contribute, we can say it'd be nice in theory, but how quickly does he get squeezed out of a rotation of a team that's really trying to win games now? Whereas Brandon is someone who I actually think could compete with Jabari. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Brandon is a better player than Jabari next year. So that is clearly much more competition in my eyes than Cam. So I would just be worried. I mean, I'm worried about Ty getting minutes. So, I really like Ty Washington. So, unfortunately, we have a roster squeeze. So I think this is something you have to really carefully take into consideration when you're looking at, how many, because, we have 12, 13 players who theoretically have some good upside that you might want to give minutes to. Those players are not all going to be on the roster next year, but there's not many roster spaces to add 2 or 3, 4 veteran players. You have to be very deliberate with this, I think.
You know what I like, and it might be unrealistic, right? The scenario where you trade with Orlando, if Orlando loves Amen Thompson for some reason, I mean they do need a point guard unless they're all in on Fultz. Suggs doesn't seem to be it. You could have a situation similar to what Orlando themselves had 2 years ago with Suggs and Franz, where, at least from an optics perspective, that you brought up the case where you did take or Stone took Cam Whitmore ahead of Brandon Miller, and Brandon Miller's looking great on some other team that's making the playoffs, and Cam's a little bit further behind, as is natural due to his age. A scenario where you do draft Cam at 6 because you need pick 6. If you did trade, let me just set the record straight then. 4 and 20 for 6 and 11, both Magic picks. If this were on the table, for example, you could have a scenario where, and depending on how the rest of the top 10 shakes out, you could have a scenario where you draft Cam Whitmore at 6 because he's not going to be there at 11. But then at 11, you draft a guy like, I don't know, like Grady Dick, for example, who's going to be likely be able to contribute from day one and likely fill a lot of that same void. The Rockets do need shooting, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would do that. I would do that and draft Casey Wallace at 11. He could be a perfect long-term fit next to Jalen. We all know what the front office is going to do. They go, it's a very high chance they select James Harden, but as long as he's not here, we can talk about what we would do. And I think they should be totally comfortable being bad next year, but having Cam Whitmore and Casey Wallace or Grady Dick or Taylor Hendricks or whoever as prospects, I would be completely comfortable with that. I think, you could put a lineup out there which is, Kaysen, Jalen, Cam Whitmore, Jabari Smith around Şengün, and it's cutting, it's passing, it's movement, 3-point shooting. We win 25 games, but obviously you hope they're a little bit better than that, and you hope that Jalen takes a star leap. And I do think we need some veterans, a point guard, to help Jalen and those guys. But I'm comfortable with all directions. And I said earlier, you're not going to bring just James in. In theory, I would love to just bring James in and it all be the young guys. And now, James, you have to set all these guys up. But obviously that's not how it's going to work. He's going to want help. So yes, if you're asking me, would I trade 4 for 6 and 11 and 20? Yes, I definitely would, because that's two. That's Cam Whitmore, who for me, I mean, first of all, I would pick Amen if Armin's there. Armin's a tier above. But if it was between Brandon and Cam and 11, I would pick Cam and 11.
Interesting. You may even be in a position where at 6, I mean, you clearly have Cam ahead, but you could still get Ausar at 6. That's another scenario that could happen.
Yeah.
It's definitely interesting. So let me bring up a different scenario then. So we've talked about a little bit of the guys right below where the Rockets are picking. What about a scenario where you just trade out of 4 completely, but you do it something like 4-12, which is OKC's pick this year, and future assets? And I know this is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, because people want an immediate reward for a terrible season that we just had, and looking at pick 12, it's not as shiny as pick 4 or a guy like Amen Thompson. But I think there could be merit to doing something like that if you're not in love with the guy at 4. And I'm not even saying that you have to get from OKC or Pixpack, which is, I know, the popular thing that people want back from OKC. I would actually do it for 12. I was talking with a Thunder fan that interacts a lot with Rockets Twitter. He has a Steven Adams picture.
Yes, yeah, she's very good.
He's really fun. And I proposed. This was pick 3 at the time. This was pre-lottery, but I don't think pick 4 would change that much. I proposed pick 4 or pick 3, but for 12. But instead of the Rockets picks, which I actually don't value that much, because I think there's a lot of doom and gloom scenarios, but I don't put that much value in pick 6 through 12. If that's what we end up giving up, we still would have a decent chance of jumping into the top 4, in which case we would keep the pick. So the trade was 4 for 12 this year for the 2026 Clippers pick, which is a high upside pick. I think the Clippers are on the verge of falling apart. If not this year, I think until 2026 it will happen. A 2027 Nuggets pick, which I believe is top 3 protected from when it was traded. And he said, you can just pick any other first-round pick. And I went with 2028 Thunder, top 5 protected, just because even though the Thunder have a bright outlook, who knows what happens in 5 years, right? This is an alternative scenario, and I'm not even sure. I think I may not like abandon on this trade, but I would even do it with 1 less pick, right? I would do it with just 12 LAC and Denver's pick. But the concept is that you are not that high on the guy that's going to be there at 4. For some reason, either you don't think you're going to have the reps to develop him, or you're just not that high on them as a prospect, or you want to accelerate your rebuild, whatever it is. So you take a guy at 12 who might still get a Cason Wallace or a Grady Dick or a Taylor Hendricks or a guy of that upper tier that could easily go top 10, but it's gonna fall because you can only take 10 guys top 10. And at the same time, you get picks for the future star trade again. And we've talked about this on the pod before. It's a common misconception that the Rockets have this huge amount of picks because of the Nets trade. After this year, after pick 20, the Rockets have 1 pick per year, just like any other franchise in the NBA that hasn't traded their picks away. So they're not ahead of anyone when it comes to a star trade, and we're back to a spot where unless the star specifically wants to come to Houston, you're likely not going to have that competitive of an offer unless you include prospects that you already have on your roster, which hurts all of the fans to think about. So I actually think that this is a fairly valid scenario. How do you feel about just not, after a season like this, just not taking a guy in the top 10?
I mean, I love that trade. Look, I've still got 60 years left in me, I think, of life. You know, that's a long time to watch basketball. I'm not as impatient as some, even though I can completely understand it after a losing season. That's a slam dunk trade. I mean, the West is a bloodbath, not necessarily because there's 5-6 teams who are all winning 55 games, but because the sort of breadth of talent throughout it. I mean, I've been trying to tell people Houston could win 10 more games next year and still be last in the West if San Antonio takes a big leap. That would probably put Houston 15th, even winning 30 games, which would be a big improvement by any measure. So it doesn't take much for you to fall to 12th, 13th, 14th, even if you have some level of, you know, even sniffing 500, you could still be a very high lottery pick. So the Clippers are absolute shambles, and I think Paul George and Kawhi are going to leave. And that leaves Norman Powell on the books in 2026, which is that pick you suggested. So yes, I am 100% into that trade. I think Steve should be the Thunder GM, and we should be the Rockets GM, and we should lock that in right now.
Wait,
Yes,
but before you go on it, Ben, it's a Kelly Eco versus Steve as GMs who wins the mock
Well,
season.
Kelly would be asking us to give, you know, the rights to Toyota Center, the rights to the next NHL franchise that's coming to Houston.
Well,
my firstborn son.
Well, see, I was going to bring up Kelly at a slightly different context. Look, I'm fully in agreement with y'all on that hypothetical. I would absolutely be interested in trading down/out if you're getting significant future draft capital because the liquidity of that is significant. What I didn't like about Kelly's constructions, besides the obvious, those were terrible proposals, let's be honest. Besides the fact that the value wasn't there, it's also, especially in a world where you're getting James Harden, I don't see why you would give up the long-term club control of an asset like the 4th overall pick and someone like Amen Thompson for these veterans like OG Anunoby, Dejounte Murray, all of these veterans who, for the most part, have only 1 or 2 years left on their deals. That's part of why they're theoretically attainable. And of course, one reason why you don't see that many deals involving top 5 picks from a team just totally moving out is that a team that's that bad, typically going for a win now veteran that doesn't have long-term club control, there's not that much value to it for a team drafting the top 5 anyway, because it's not like they're ready to contend the next season. Now, in this case, the calculus is a little bit different because, of course, we know the Rockets have their future draft obligations coming due to Oklahoma City starting next year with top 4 protections. We know the incentives to try and win now. We know they've been linked to James Harden and so on and so forth. We talked about that ad nauseum. But here's the converse of that. If James Harden is coming in and we feel pretty good about the floor rising, I think, you know, a lot of people have talked about Harden as the ultimate floor raiser, and that's what he is, assuming health. Then to me, what is the incentive to trade out for a veteran other than if Harden is asking for it? But if Harden's asking for it, in my opinion, and I've said this before, I just would turn the page on Harden and then start looking at guys like Chris Paul, Mike Conley, go down a tier in terms of the veteran point guards to bring in. If Harden is open to coming in without a veteran co-star, then why are you trading an asset like Amen Thompson, who you would have 4 years of ridiculously cheap labor from, followed by, you know, his second contract, unless he looks like a star. And if he does look like a star, then great, that's a good problem to have. If not, you're probably going to get a friendly second contract as well because of his status as a restricted free agent. Why would you give up all of that club control for years, all of those low to mid 20s production, which is at such a premium in the NBA, for a veteran in a year that you're not really trying to win at a high level anyway? It's not like you can contend for a title. So for me, part of the appeal to James Harden is that if you feel good about getting him, then to me, that is your floor raiser. So if he's open to coming without making a deal for, you know, the types of guys that were mentioned in Kelly's article, let's say the Anunoby, the Murray, the Keldon Johnson types, then as I see it, there's not much appeal to moving out of the draft for that type of asset. If James is okay basically being a lone star in Houston, then to me, all of a sudden, I see a lot more value just staying pat and reaping the rewards of another top 5 draft pick. Am I missing anything there?
Yeah, I suppose you're double dipping in a sense. If you try to do that for little return, you know, it's kind of a self-filtering thing where if you sign James Harden, in my opinion, you're signing him with the understanding that he's not coming here to be a contender. He's coming here because he wants to be back in Houston for whatever reason.
Right.
So,
Right.
and what I will say is that something that I think goes under discussed is, unfortunately, Harden might be a 60-game player right now. So let's say we are on course for 32 wins by, the trade deadline. And then it becomes pretty clear, we're probably not going to get the play in. I think there'll still be merit in going for it because of the habits and everything, all the benefits that it could be there. But, if James has got Achilles soreness, if he's got hamstring soreness, that could be the time to sit him and play Amen Thompson. I think that's not even a tanking move. That's a very realistic proposition. James had that exact same scenario this season. The only reason he was playing was because they were still a title contender. So if you're looking at, fighting for a 13th seed, then I think it's very realistic to suggest that we're actually only signing Harden for 3/4 of a season, and then you let Amen take over after 3/4 of a season where he's been able to watch and learn and have the shade and sharp this season after Damian Lillard went down, just started averaging 26 points a game because he'd bedded in. And obviously, it's a little easier at the end of the season because you're playing a lot of tighter teams. But I would love that scenario. And then guess what? You've got a 40% chance of a top 4 pick if you're the 5th or 6th seed, which could still be a 10, 12, 13, maybe even higher win improvement, which would be a fantastic season. I would love a season like Orlando had, wouldn't you? I mean, that'd be like the dream.
I think one of the things that goes underrated about James is, even though he's playing less games a season, he is still, or for the Sixers, he still played 38 minutes a night. So he's not getting the minutes that he should as someone with the injury issues that he's had over the last few seasons. Coming into a lower pressure environment here, you should theoretically be able to bump 37 down to 32, 33 if you can get him to agree with it. We never know with James if he's the one that's actually wanting to play or whatever it is. You can probably extend how many games he can play if you play him less per game, because, I mean, with Philly, with Embiid also being an injury-prone superstar, it's tough to get there. And one last thing that I wanted to just circle back to my proposal earlier with the Thunder. There's other teams that you could do this with, but I like the Thunder because, first of all, we have precedent of them doing something like this. They did it last year for Usman Jang, where they traded, I think, the 3 or 4 first-round picks directly for pick, I think, 12.
There's also a working relationship between the Rockets and Thunder going back to the Şengün trade.
Yeah, and so the position we are in, where we have a lot of prospects that we can't play them all, and we're looking for a consolidation trade, the Thunder are going to need that. But instead of it being with prospects, because I think they drafted just a lot of second-round picks so far, or compared to us at least, they are going to be in a position where they are going to want to consolidate some of the first-round picks that they have, which is a lot. I think it's not the most in the league anymore, I don't think, because the Jazz exist now and they're rebuilding, but they're going to look to consolidate. And when you're trading down, when you have the one big asset and you're breaking it down into pennies, in the NBA, I think you're always negotiating from a position of strength, because everybody's looking to do the opposite. Everybody's looking to turn a lot of pennies into $1. So if you're trying to do if you're obviously on the other side of that, you're going to have a lot of leverage, and you may be able to get a better deal than you'd expect for those circumstances.
To clarify my point, and then, Paolo, I want to ask you the same question I asked Nathan, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. When you talk about these trades of dealing out, and again, this is dealing out for a veteran, dealing out for the type of scenario that Paolo outlined is entirely different. I'm in agreement that should be a consideration because of the liquidity of those assets moving forward and what you can do with them, whether it's making those picks yourself or using them on the trade market. The reason I look at Kelly's article and I'm turned off, besides the value not really being there, if we're talking about James Harden already being in Houston and you already having that higher floor, then again, raising the floor is sort of the only rationale, in my opinion, for a top 5 type team in terms of one of the league's worst to trade for a good but not great veteran. Like, we talked about Anunoby, Cam Johnson. Who else did he throw in that article? Miles Turner. Yeah. Like, to me, when you make that trade, you're going older, you're getting far less contractual control. It's not in age alignment with your young core. There's a lot of things that aren't perfect, but it's just a sacrifice the team thinks it needs to make for the short-term benefit of being in a much more competitive environment and winning games. Because, as we saw this past season, there are limits to just sacking young prospects, because if you're losing 60 plus games every season, there's going to be bad habits, and that takes a toll on the ultimate long-term outcome of your development of these young guys. But if you feel good about bringing in James Harden and he is open to doing it without a co-star, which is the hypothetical that I keep going back to, and Nathan, I think you have a fair point mentioning that, Harden has to be open to that on some level just by talking about Houston in the first place, because it's not like there's anyone even close to his age on the roster right now, and other trades are far from a given. So if theoretically you already have Harden as the floor raiser, then why are you giving up both age and contractual control for a more win now veteran to benefit you in a couple of seasons that it's not like you're going to contend for a title anyway? For me, if you don't keep the pick, and I would probably just be inclined to make the pick myself and take whoever's left of Scoot, Brandon, or Amen Thompson. That's my personal preference. But if we're talking about potentially trading back or out for value, then to me that has a lot more appeal than trading for a veteran, because I just don't really see the point in paying the premium for one of those types of vets that Kelly mentioned if you already have Harden on the way to accomplish the same purpose. You may as well take the greater long-term liquidity, which comes from drafting a top prospect or getting more draft picks that you can sort of, restock your coffers, if you will, when it comes to, your war chest for future trades. Does that make sense to you, Paolo?
Yeah, it does. I think I find very few scenarios where it makes sense to trade out, but for just a vet or a young star. I think the only few that could make sense, and I'm not even including Jaylen Brown in this because, well, now he's eligible for a supermax, and I don't know if he's worth a supermax. I think for the Celtics he is, because they don't have any alternatives. But from a pure value standpoint, I'm not sure if he is a super. I know he's a max player. I don't know if he's a super max type player. But the only scenario where I could see it maybe making sense is if you are trading for someone in the situation that the Rockets traded for James Harden when they did the first time around. It's a guy coming off his rookie deal that you feel really confident, or that your staff feels really confident will be a star. And in that case, if you are maxing him, you're going to get 5 years of team control from it. And so in that situation, it could make sense if it's a guy that's, you
Yeah.
really believe he's going to be that guy, but the team that currently has him is not that confident about maxing him. I could see. I don't think it will happen, and I don't think it makes sense for the Sixers anyways. I could see Maxey being a guy that right now might not look like a straight up max guy, but if your staff and your scouting thinks that he's going to be someone who, when put in a bigger role, kind of like James Harden was, is going to ascend to superstardom, then it could make sense, right? I'm talking about Maxey
Yeah.
more in the not Maxey specifically, but a guy in his situation that was behind a
Yeah.
couple of stars and that is now going to get paid. And I mean, if the Sixers keep Harden and Maxim for 4 years, that gets to be a really expensive
Yeah.
team. Although I know Tobias Harris is coming off this contract next year.
But yeah, basically just a very small subset of players. And that's why, I didn't go too deep into the discussion in the Kelly article today. It's not just the value in how those trades are constructed. It's those types of names. And you can even throw Pascal Siakam and maybe even Jaylen Brown into the mix as well. To me, that's just not worth it, especially when you're talking about guys that you can't extend for 4 or 5 years anyway. And potentially you could just sign them yourself in a year or so, or pursue them on the open market by trying to sign and trade for them a year from now anyway. I don't see the point in paying a premium right now, especially if you already have Harden coming in as your floor raiser in this scenario. Then to me, it's not just about the value of the way Kelly constructed it being off. It's more, I just don't see the point overall in that scenario. And I'm just much more inclined at that point to think long term, be it making the draft pick yourself this year, which is probably what I would do, or maybe trading back, as Paolo said, for more draft assets and restock your future war chest, if you will. I don't really see a point to adding another sort of win now veteran to maybe take you from, the low to 30s in terms of wins that you'd probably have, adding Harden and Pat Beverly and maybe a Bruce Brown type, to maybe if you add another one of those guys, maybe you can really talk about winning low 40s and being in the play-in mix. I just don't really see the point and what that does for you in the grand scheme to where that's worthwhile, right?
Yeah, I think ideally a 2 timeline thing would work great, where you bring in James, a couple of other great players, and you pretend to be a contender, and you have a fun couple of years, and you supplement them with the youth that will take over. And you don't mind giving away future assets in terms of picks because you have your future assets already on the team. The problem with that scenario is if Jabari Smith doesn't learn how to shoot or relearn how to shoot, he's not going to be long as a starter in the NBA. If Tari doesn't learn how to finish at the rim and get a little bit smarter as an offensive player, I think in terms of play call and things like that, he's going to struggle to be a long-term starter. Şengün needs to get better defensively. Jalen needs to get better. There are questions about all of our young players where we don't have the surefire. And I feel very good. I'm very high on our young players, but there are too many questions where you can lock that young core in and say, this is the young core. Now let's give the old core and we'll do them both together. I think you still need to keep buying lottery tickets. Which is what Amen is, and which is why I have him, higher than most of the guys for Houston, because he is the ultimate lottery ticket, where I think has a higher ceiling than Jalen did. You asked me about Ivy earlier, just to circle this back in a roundabout way. I think Amen is a better prospect than Jalen was, so that's a very high lottery ticket in my opinion.
Absolutely. And by the way, we haven't talked much about other top 10 guys when you look at Jarris Walker, Anthony Black, Taylor Hendricks. To me, it's not that it's unfathomable, but they're just lesser versions of other guys that are likely to be on the board for the Rockets, assuming they stay in the top 10. Black's a solid prospect, but the Thompson twins to me are better and play similar roles. When we talk about Walker and Hendricks, it's tougher for me to see a clear fit with the Rockets, given Jabari, given Tari, given Şengün, given the investment you've already put in the front court. To me, it's more likely that you go with a guy who's going to have a cleaner route to immediate playing time and more of a fit long term in terms of how the current core you have fits together. So it's not so much that those aren't good prospects. It's just, to me, because they're slightly behind, and we should throw Whitmore in the mix as well when we're talking about the wings. It's more that those guys just aren't great fits with the roster the Rockets currently have. That's sort of how I see it. Am I missing anything there?
No, I completely agree. I didn't really do much scouting on Keontae George and Anthony Black, just from what I saw of them, and hearing trusted people as well. They just never seemed to be a top 5 pick, worthy candidate. So I watched a little bit, but I didn't really dig that much deep because I just didn't see them as ever being on Houston's radar, and nothing I've heard or seen has changed that. I think Jarris is the only one of those guys that should be at least on the radar. But I think I just don't think like I said, he's not a lottery ticket. There are some people who think he could be the next Draymond. I think that's absolutely wild. I do not agree, but I still think he's a good prospect. But this could potentially be Houston's last top 5, 6, 7 pick. So get another high potential guy, because you need to keep trying to get that star. I think you just need to keep trying to get hits.
Yeah, just real quick. I think a lot of it is positional as well. It's the fact that you're likely getting a guy that's going to fight for minutes with Tyrese and then Jabari Smith, and likely whoever they bring in, whether it is a Bruce Brown or someone like that. And so I'm not going to confidently say that I'd rather have Jarris Walker than Tyrese, for example. And that may be a hot take, but it's close enough to the point of not really considering them with our top pick, with rather one of the scenarios that we've listed before.
So do you mean you'd rather have Tari or Jarris?
I'd rather have Tari.
Yes, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
To me, it's close enough that you have to at least take it into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same for if we had a center on the draft board. Like, I'm high enough on Şengün to want to not clash with that. The same with Tari as well. So I think it's definitely reasonable to think about that. I mean, the NBA is proven to be a league where you can't have too many wings, but you can have too many wings as well at the same time.
Okay, so as we wind down our discussion, I want to talk a bit about pick 20, the second that the Rockets have in the first round. And before we go into any particulars, I want to talk about sort of the value of that pick, because for the Rockets, they already have a deep roster. They're going to add in free agency. They're going to have a higher pick in the first round. So this is a pick where you need to go best player available or best asset available if you're the Rockets, and maybe they end up trading out altogether. It could make sense to try and get a future first that has more liquidity on the trade market. There's no guarantee that the Rockets stick there. But for purposes of our discussion, let's pretend they do keep another pick in the first round, and either stay at 20 or perhaps move up or down a few slots. One thing that's interesting, and I've seen this idea gain some traction on Twitter the last few days, is potentially moving up a few slots with the inclusion of Jae'Sean Tate. One hypothetical I saw was maybe trying to move up to 17 with the Lakers. I believe if you don't execute the deal until July, you actually could do 20 and Tate for 17, because the Lakers will have cap room. They won't on draft night, but they will once you get to July, assuming you stagger the moves correctly, because they have so many guys rolling off the books. Even with the cap holds, you would be able to offload Tate. And Tate, it's not that he's a bad player. He's just not quite in age alignment with the core in Houston, and he's a bit redundant when you look at the front court guys they already have, like Jabari and Tari and KJ Martin, and so on and so forth. David Weiner, Beema Thog, had a proposal today I saw of maybe offering Tate 20 and some second round picks to Dallas for number 10 and Reggie Bullock, which would basically be a cash saving move, clear their books a little bit. At that point, the incentives are different. If you're moving up to 17, then you get Tate off your books entirely, and that gives the Rockets even more salary cap room heading into July. The proposal that David put together is sort of the opposite. It's using some of your salary cap room to absorb a slightly bloated deal from another team, in that case to move up 10 spots. But I think conceptually, because Tate feels a little bit redundant here and he's not in perfect age alignment, and he does fit for teams that are trying to win now, which generally a lot of the teams in the teens are attempting to do, then it's not all that unfathomable to see a scenario where the Rockets explore what 20 and Tate could do for them, or maybe even 20 and KPJ, although I think that's less likely for a number of reasons, both his contract and his fit, and whether there's this clear of a need. Tate's a lot more plug and play. He can fit on a lot of rosters. Everybody wants a guy like Jae'Sean Tate that's trying to win now. So with that in mind, how much of a tier gap do you see between like 20 and say the Lakers at 17? Or if we're talking about, 20 and a team like Dallas at 10, I agree that that's probably a bit extreme. Most people thought that the Mavs would decline that. Again, maybe you can sweeten the pot with a few seconds, as David tossed out in his hypothetical. But just talk, if you could, Nathan, about like sort of the tiers and just how much of a dip there is between, I guess, the 10 through 15 range, the 15 through 20 range, and whether you think it's worth it in your eyes for the Rockets to potentially try and move up with that pick as part of a consolidation move.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting actually, because I think those tiers are already well defined and very even numbers. I think 10 through 15, you've got Grady Dick, Keontae George, Casey Wallace, those kind of players. Mm-hmm. And then in the latter teens, that's where Houston should really be looking at Whitehead, Lively. Maybe Leonard Miller has some fans. I know Centre Back has had his fans all season. And then I think after that, once 20 is where I think it drops off into you're really looking like, Houston could very much value someone like Chris Murray just to come in and play as I think he'll be 24 next season. But you're not really necessarily at that point. You might just think we'd rather have a player who we know is an NBA player right now. So I think it just does drop off there, and you're sort of thinking, should we start looking at draft and stash guys? Will Koulibaly, would Nagy in Barcelona potentially play in the G League or stay abroad? But if you're looking at kind of like my favorite prospect, and this is not a hot take, I think most people are interested in this, is Whitehead or Lively. And I think they're getting so much love right now. Whitehead's kind of going the other way because of the injury, but especially Lively just seems to be shooting up boards. But trading Tate to move up and get the guy. Houston has been aggressive in getting their guys like Şengün. They obviously traded for 2 picks for Tari, and I think they felt pretty good that he was going to drop to him at 17, but they kind of targeted him. So I think by the draft we'll have a fairly good idea of who they like, and this conversation might be a bit easier to have. But I would target Whitehead and Lively, and I think getting rid of Tate, that's 6.5 million just cleared off your cap space right there, for the price of an extra 500 grand of your draft cap hold. So that could be the difference between getting Cam Johnson and not getting Cam Johnson, or forcing Brooklyn to match a high offer and getting Seth Curry to shake loose or Royce O'Neal to shake loose. So just the cap space clearance of Tate, I think is an interesting one. It's not exactly my highest priority because I would be fine with him on the roster next year. But if you don't think he's going to be cracking the rotation, which I think he would in a Udoka rotation, but if you don't think that, even just a cap clearing move, that opens up. I mean, that gets you to 70 million in cap space. That's pretty high.
Yeah, so I kind of have a theory on this, and I'll get to that a little bit later on. But I think that at 20, and I think the Rockets have gotten fairly lucky with their late picks, or where they've landed, with exception of 24 and 23 and 2 years ago. I think at 20, you're right at the end of a tier, which means, if you want to spin it positively, which means you're guaranteed to get like a guy like Jet Howard, or a guy, maybe Jordan Hawkins falls if nobody falls in love with him. Maybe you're able to get Koulibaly there, or G.G. Jackson there, right? One of the guys that you can send to the G and have them there because they're going to need those development reps. The bonus with what Ben is saying is that instead of being what we've been so far, which is the team that gets, that's just inside the tier, so they're going to get someone from that tier, but they won't really get to choose. You get to choose, and it might be the difference between getting what's left over and my guys would be the same guys as Nathan's, Derek Lively or Derek Whitehead, which to me are at the top of that same tier. So I think there's definitely value there. I'm also kind of desperate to move a lot of the lower end assets on this roster, whether that be KJ Martin, whether that be Jason Tate, Christopher, I don't think has value at all, but if someone values him, Ty Washington, or I'm missing someone, or Garuba, because I think coming into next year, I don't think any of these, if they shape the roster the way I expect them to, which I think will be James Harden plus a couple of other vets, one with the remaining cap space, one with the room mid-level exception, these guys are not going to play. And it's going to be tough because if they don't play for a full year, and I know injuries happen, but I'm not even sure they'll be ready to play for the full year as far as the draft pick goes. Can
I make an appeal for Ty Washington? Ty has been forgotten. I completely agree. Josh is not long for the NBA. I don't think. I think Garuba, has some potential, but I don't think he will be long for this team. Ty Washington is going to be a very solid, very good backup point guard for a long time, I believe, in this league. We've seen the low turnovers, the smart play. I think he's going to be a good defender as he puts on weight. He's got a really long wingspan. He's a very good chaser off ball. I think he could guard two guards. Your shooting guard, the guy who runs around screens and gets open. And that floater is nasty. The in-between game, he calms everyone down. Everyone's been begging for a Tyus Jones, that kind of player. Ty Washington, I really hope, gets a chance to play a solid 14 minutes a night, every night, going forward. And I would really hope that Houston doesn't give up on him.
See, I don't even disagree with you. Of the guys I listed, Tyus is the guy I'm highest on.
Yeah.
I just struggle to see realistically they're going to run a 9 or 10 man rotation. I think an 8 or a 9 man rotation. I think a 10 man rotation may even be a stretch. And I just struggle to see these guys getting any playing time at all. And if they're going to go to the G League, or they're going to sit at the end of the bench, they're just going to sit there depreciating in value, which is why I feel hard pressed to make moves like what Ben just said, even if it's just a slight trade up, and Tate might look great on another team. And you might look foolish for trading him for that cheap. The truth is, the alternative is likely letting them rot on the bench, and so it's kind of just a mismanagement of assets. It's not huge because I don't think these guys have much value. I think you might be able to get a first-round pick for KJ Martin, just because to a contender, a guy that can contribute like he can on a $2 million a year salary can move the needle for some teams that are really struggling with flexibility. But other than that, I think these are mostly guys that are going to be that have second-round pick type value or a slight trade-up type of value. And so I would love to do something that, like what Ben just said, if you're in a position just like last year where at 17 the Rockets had Tari, but at 16 I was very confident because they had either Tari or AJ Griffin. If you see that, I don't know, the Lakers or the Hawks or the Pelicans or something or some team like that, if you feel like there's only one guy left of the guys that you value above the tier that you're on, I think it would be smart to make that move. And if they don't make that move, I think it would be smart to just trade these guys out, even if it's for seconds. Because them sitting at the end of the bench, if it's 5 of them, it's just a waste. You could keep 2, 3 of them. You can send them to the Q League for the younger ones. I think it's just tough. And then my theory is that it just seemed really weird last year that Tarisin just fell to the Rockets. Considering that he has ties to Stone, they're both from Seattle, the entire draft cycle, Tarisin was not the entire draft cycle, the entire post-lottery draft cycle. Tarisin all of a sudden was always 17. He was like, everybody knew that this guy was going to go 17. And I kind of feel like, and this is not sourced, it's just, as I said, a conspiracy theory. I feel like there was some manipulation there to get Tarisin to fall to 17. And I get the feeling that something similar might happen this year with Jet Howard. And all of a sudden, we're not seeing Jet Howard in the top 20 as much. The guy that was mocked to us the entire season was Eric Lively, and he's skyrocketing up boards. I don't think we're seeing Jet Howard as high as we used to. He worked out with the Rockets very early on. He seems to be I think he's the type of player that Stone would value. He is a Rockets fan since he was little. He's always been a Rockets fan. And I just feel like it might be one of those situations where the conspiracy theorist in me comes to the top. And I think there may be some handshake thing there where Jet may fall to 20.
I do like that, but I think the slight issue with that is I think Houston will be very fluid and open to trading that pick right up until the moment they make it. So I don't know if that necessarily works as a kind of promise, because I think they'll still be taking calls on it on draft night, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I would think so.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So you can't exactly promise a guy in that scenario.
I'm going to ask the same question to both of you. You're much more draft nerds than I am. I've been focused for Rockets Wire on the bigger picture stuff, obviously the Harden pursuit and free agency and what's going to happen with pick 4. I know both of you have studied the crop of guys potentially available at pick 20 a lot more than I have. So same question to each of you. Tell me 5 guys at the top of your list when it comes to reasonable targets at pick 20, or let's say, I mean, the same could be, maybe they move up a pick or 2. Let's say 5 guys in that general range that you think are plausible for the Rockets, assuming they stay somewhere in the vicinity of pick 20. Nathan, you can go first.
Okay, so I have Lively, Whitehead, and Bryce Centerback as my 3 main guys, who are all very reasonable, I think. Ryan Rupert, I would have said a few months ago, I've cooled on him slightly, so I would sort of like to go back and review the tape on him. And then my last guy is it would be Koulibaly from Metropolitans, although I have now sworn off all French players forever, so we can trade him immediately. But if you would have asked me a month ago, I would have said him.
Wait, just before I give my top 5 real quick, this may be just a me thing. But does the fact, and this is the weirdest question I'm ever going to ask on a podcast, does the fact that he's French and he's really young not bring out of you some sort of soft spot for him that is some, and I think this is with me, this is some sort of something that's happening, that has some ties to European football? Because the French wonder kids always pan out, and this guy just looks like a French. The measurements are all there. I don't know, dude.
Although I will say for me, I hate all of France now after everything that happened with the draft lottery night and Wemby sort of middle fingering the Rockets and his reaction. Yeah, I hate all of France now.
Yeah, is that
he's
not
Wemby's teammate? So
is that not related
the Rockets
to?
Too.
Are you sure that's not related to the performance Wesley Fofana just had?
Oh God.
And France, it's a double blow for me because France just beat England in the World Cup, even though we played them off a park. So
I don't know. They used to always beat us, but we won our Euros against them, so they get a pass from me.
Yeah.
I'll get into on their home court, on their home stadium as well. So I'll get into my top 5. I think the first guy is Derek Lively. The second guy is Derek Whitehead as well, and then I'll go Jet Howard. My unrealistic pick will be Jordan Hawkins. I'm going to steer clear of Koulibaly because of that bias that I just talked about, and I'm gonna throw a bone at Marcus Sasser because I think at least through this rebuild we got to get one U of H guy.
Yeah, I think that would be something that Tillman supports as well. I know it probably killed him when they didn't get Quentin Grimes, especially when Josh Christopher to this point doesn't look like he's going to hit. I'm sure behind closed doors, Tillman Fertitta has to be wondering, damn, why couldn't we have taken Quentin Grimes with that last first round pick in 2021 and at least have had the U of H factor to sort of draw in a few more people to Toyota Center during these basement years.
Can I throw in one wild card guy as an early second if we move back? I really like Jaime Jaquez Jr. from UCLA, who's played in college for 3 or 4 years now, but a very capable role player. That would be my early second round guy if that's where we end up.
Nathan, shameless question. I don't think this guy is a fit for the Rockets because simply they already have depth. We've talked about needing to consolidate several times, but I've convinced Madison to put Kobe Brown into the top 30. What do you think about him? And even if not for the Rockets, do you see a path for him contributing somewhere?
I have to be honest, I'm not familiar enough with his game.
Okay.
I'm looking.
Okay, that's Mizzou. Your assignment, man.
Because he's Mizzou.
Yeah.
No, he's only positive things.
Yeah, he's a versatile forward.
He shot 46% from 3.
But that's the question because up until this year, he actually was not a good shooter. So it's a relatively small sample. Now, in his defense, he is 23 years old. Mizzou's coaching until this year was very archaic. And basically, they had a big jump last offseason going from just very much running like 90s and 2000 sets to, under Dennis Gates, like pretty progressive new age offense. And he really benefited from that. And so to me, that strikes me as something that beyond just a small sample might indicate what he can do more in the NBA. So even though he's 23, again, the circumstances of his development, I think he was artificially held back a little bit by sort of the archaic system they had in place his first 4 years. But yeah, between his age, he's an older prospect, which inherently means a bit less upside, and the fact the Rockets are already stocked at the forward spots between Jabari, Tare, Jayshon, KJ, so on and so forth. Yeah, I don't think he's really a fit here, but I would love to see him hit somewhere. And Madison has him in the top 30 now. So Nathan, that's my assignment for you. Check out some Kobe Brown footage whenever you have some time, and we'll go from there.
Wait a minute. This dude was born January 1st, 2000?
Yes, absolutely hilarious. Yes, January 1st, 2000. Yes.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
To see a prospect born before 9/11 is quite a thing. And quite a bit before. I mean, that's, wow. Yeah, I mean.
The 9/11 cutoff? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Y2K cutoff.
Yeah. Well, he made it.
Anyway.
Well, we've checked off everything on my list. Any parting shot that either of you want to throw out before we close down?
No, I'm very excited. I know it was a gutting blow to not get Wemby or Scoot, but Amen Thompson, I think, is a better prospect than Jalen was. Although he's very close, I think is a better prospect than Jabari was, and those are our 2 high draft picks. So be very excited because we've got potential to draft he's got questions, big problems, but also a very, very high future. So very tantalizingly high prospect.
So you'd go with Amen Thompson as the blue chip of all blue chips as far as the Houston rebuild if they get it?
Well, I mean, Jalen, I think, has shown me some more stuff. We've got 2 years of him playing in the NBA now and doing well, I think. So
right.
I think Jalen, 2 years in, I think he's going to be a very good, very quickly, just look at his free throw throwing. That's my big thing. Look at his foul throwing to end the season and some playmaking. But going into the draft, I would have said I'm most excited about Amen, and I also like Jalen and Jabari a lot. So
as draft prospects.
Yeah, so that's a good position to be in, I think.
Yeah, my parting shot is that in a month now, we'll look back on this podcast and see that 80% of our conversation was actually useless because Scoot fell to 4 and we drafted Derek Lively.
Hello, I'm so proud of you for going nearly this whole podcast without talking about Scoot.
And we're trading for Paulo as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Although I do wonder...
we'll get who was the guy that the Pelicans drafted, Paulo?
Kyra Lewis.
Kyra Lewis. We'll get him back, yeah.
And while we're at it, from that draft, we'll also get Jalen Smith, and he's going to be Capella with a 3-point shot. Back then, I did not know anything about the draft, and that was my comp for him. So yeah,
25 and 57 record.
Although I will say, when we're talking about,
I'll be proud about 25 wins with that team.
If we're talking about prospects from this draft, I'm going to predict that 5 years from now, the most obvious NBA storyline, if the Thompson twins hit, in the late 2020s or 2030 range, we're going to be talking about how the Thompson twins play together and how they manipulate the system to get on the same team. To me, that's the most obvious, like 5 to 7 year storyline. And I don't know, maybe if you get one of those guys, and let's say you get Amen and he turns out to be, as you've been saying, Nathan, a stud, and Ausar is more of a high-end role player, then it obviously makes more sense for the role player to follow the star than the other way around. So who knows? Maybe there's a path way down the line that you can add Ausar to him. Of course, club control, rookie deals, that's a long way off. But to me, if we're talking like super long-term, come on, is that not the most obvious storyline for like 5 to 7 years from now?
And I got a more obvious one. In 5 to 7 years, the Sonics are going to come back, and we're going to witness a repeat of the Shaq getting out of Orlando. Orlando's going to get cold feet about paying him max to what seems like a franchise player for some reason, and they're all going to go to the Sonics, and KPK is going to join them there, and Tari Eason's going to join them there, and it's going to be just a bunch of tampering. So yeah, that's my story. And they'll poach Rafael Stone as well.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Houston has so many Seattle connections now between Rafael and KPJ. And, Tari's a Seattle guy too, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully the Houston roster and organization is turned over enough by them that that's not as much of a factor, because right now, boy, there could be a lot of poaching from the Seattle area.
And they wanted Marjon Beauchamp as well last year at the draft. Houston definitely wanted him, and he's Seattle.
You're right. Yeah, great point. All right, well, we will put a bow on this right here. Guys, thank you so much for doing this. And hopefully, as far as our listeners, this can help you get through Memorial Day weekend. We typically don't do 2 episodes in a week, but we may do that a bit more over the next month, because we know there's a lot of interest when it comes to the Houston Rockets and the NBA draft, and we want to be a source of good content for you guys. So check out our archives for more, because we may be putting out some additional episodes, this being the first 2-episode week. We had Brian Kalbrowski of USA Today in the episode that dropped on Wednesday with all sorts of fun draft tidbits and nuggets. If you have not checked that out, again, hit up our Logger Line archives wherever you're listening to this, Apple, Google, Spotify. Just hit up our link tree at the Logger Line on Twitter, and you can find your distributor of choice. Paolo, Nathan, thanks so much. Is there anything else?
One last thing. When they ask you where you were when the Celtics won Game 2 en route to the first comeback from a 3-0 deficit, you're going to say that you were recording a podcast with 2 guys from Europe. They're up. They were up 20-5.
Wow.
Like 10 seconds ago. It's 23-10 now.
And the absence of Gabe Vincent, by the way, that's pretty significant. I mean, crazier things have happened, and if it gets to Game 7. That's going to get interesting in a hurry. And it should be noted, I've got to do this as an Astros fan, but did y'all notice how in Game 4 in Miami, somehow both Alex Rodriguez and Derek Jeter were courtside? And of course, Alex Rodriguez and Derek Jeter are the stars of the 2004 Yankees team that became the first MLB team ever to blow a 3-0 lead to, of all teams, Boston, when it was the Red Sox coming back from down 3-0, and somehow Alex Rodriguez and Derek Jeter, I don't know why the Heat didn't just kick them off the court at that point, being like, dude, that's the most obvious bad omen ever. Those 2 guys on the court with a 3-0 lead. Yeah, if that happens, that's going to be an all-time meme, the shot of A-Rod and Derek Jeter courtside in Miami with the Heat blowing the 3-0 edge.
It's just sad that's gonna make Bill Simmons happy. To be great to as a storyline, we can have that for Bill Simmons. If this happens for him, I need the Red Sox to get sunned by Jordan and Tucker for at least 10 more years.
Hey, now, Bill Simmons was the one and only Jabari Smith Jr. first team voter out of 100. So
it's a typo. Everybody knows it was a typo.
Generational.
All right. Well, I was going to ask, I'm assuming Twitter is the best place for both of you guys, Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA and Nathan at Nathan Fogg 1 as far as content.
Yeah, I'm going to do a big, really long video on Amen Thompson breaking down his whole season. So I also have a YouTube channel called Tea and Rockets for obvious reasons, which you can probably guess. Tea and Rockets, that'll probably be an hour long. I'm not sure how long it'll run to, but that will be very in detail.
Yeah, and you've got that YouTube channel linked to your Twitter page at Nathan Fogg 1, correct?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Perfect. And Paolo, it's Paolo Alves NBA. Unlike Paolo Banchero, it's Paulo for those who are not following Paolo already.
Yeah, people follow me for the poetry nowadays.
Yeah, and people follow you for Astros, obviously. All right. Well, this is where we will finally adjourn. For Paolo and Nathan, I'm Ben. If you're not already following me on Twitter, you can do so at Ben Dubose. Mention the show, The Logger Line. You can do so at The Logger Line. And then our sponsors and partners, just check out that link tree at The Logger Line. And that's where you can find links to Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire, Carback Brewing. Of course, this show served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager, the beer of Carback Brewing, developed in collaboration with the Houston Rockets. You can find all of their content and their websites. All that information is available through the link tree, which you can find at the Logger Line on Twitter. With that complete, we will adjourn. For Paolo and Nathan, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.